Well, good afternoon everybody and welcome to today's WEConnect International webinar. My name is Maggie Berry and I'm the Executive Director for WEConnect International in Europe, and I'm delighted that you've joined us for today's webinar, Assertive Communication, How to Speak and Be Heard in Meetings. Our presenter today is Jenny Garrett, a sought-after executive coach, trainer, author, speaker and founder of Reflexion Associates, a WEConnect International certified women's business enterprise. In today's sessions, we're going to be learning more about assertive communication strategies and skills, including how to handle and manage communication glitches, how to speak so people listen and you are heard, and how to leave a lasting impression so everyone will definitely know who you are. To keep background noise to minimum, participants are on mute, but please do feel free to use the chat functionality if you have any questions, and there will be time for Q&A at the end of the session as well. Jenny's going to talk for about 40 to 45 minutes. The session is being recorded, so you will be able to listen back again. So Jenny, thank you so much for presenting for us today. I'm going to pass the presenter rights over to you, and the floor is yours. Thanks very much.
Thank you very much for that introduction, Maggie, and hello everyone. Well done for making some time to think about your own personal and professional development and think about your assertive communication approaches. Whether you're thinking about it for yourself or for your staff, I'm going to share with you some tools and techniques which I think will really make a difference. So that's me, Jenny Garrett, award-winning coach, author and speaker, as Maggie has said. And before I ran my own business, I worked in a number of organisations. I worked in corporate organisations, Schroeder Leasing, Hamptons International, the big estate agency, and also Ashridge Business School, which is an international business school. So I had my challenges with communicating assertively, making sure that I was heard, making sure that I wasn't seen as aggressive or passive, and finding the right balance. And I think it can be a real challenge for women to find that balance, which is why I particularly love providing this webinar, because I think it makes a big difference for us when we can get that balance right. So today you're going to have an introduction to the mental and physical preparation needed to be heard. We're going to think about what the right approach is to speaking up in your organisation. I'm going to share a few voice tips, and you will definitely take away some practical actions to try back in your workplace. I'm a coach, and I think sometimes people think coaching is about having a passive conversation where someone placates you, gives you lots of support, and you go off feeling a little bit better. But for me, coaching is about taking actions back into your workplace that impact your life. So I will be challenging you to take something away that makes a difference for you, and I hope that's okay. So when do you use assertive communication? When do you need it most? If you want to write in the chat tool, please do. I'd love to know about your specific scenarios. When do you think you need to use it most? Today, I'm going to mostly focus on thinking about meetings. Meetings are a very important part of our work lives. I don't know about you, but most clients that I speak to are called into meetings regularly. In fact, meetings take up most of their day, and they wonder when they'll actually get any work done. And quite often it's when they have a day working from home or when they're working in the evenings that they find they can actually catch up. So there are many challenges with when do we actually get to communicate assertively. And meetings are challenging because there's a lot of power and politics. People are thinking about when they can be heard, who's going to hear them, who's going to recognize what they say, and what that's going to mean for their career. And so lots of people are vying for attention, vying for airtime, and so being assertive in that environment is really important. But not just that, doing it in the right way is really important, because there are some people you will only see in meetings. There are some people who will only see you in meetings, and so that's your only opportunity to shine. It's your only opportunity for them to get a picture of what you're about. You might find your sponsor in a meeting. The person who's going to interview you for your next promotion might be in that meeting. So this assertive communication becomes really very important to do right. And what are meetings? They're a pressure cooker microcosm of the workplace. A diverse group of people with their own ideas come together to get the job done. and not everyone's ideas can be taken up, and individual styles and how they interact with each other, as well as how influential they are, makes quite a difference. So importantly, people are getting credit or not for their contributions to the outcome in these meetings. So if you're going into meetings at the moment thinking, how quickly can I get out of here? Maybe if I hide at the back and zone out, it will be okay. Maybe if I'm on my mobile responding to my emails, no one will notice. I'd encourage you to immediately think again about that. People are noticing. People are thinking about what you're doing, how you're contributing, how you're interacting, and it's making a difference. And whether you are running your own business or attending client meetings or attending networking meetings, all of these meetings, people are making quite a judgment about you because of how you're interacting and acting in these places. So when we think about women particularly and their approach to meetings, this is some of the feedback we get. Women are often told to stop acting like a facilitator and start saying what they actually stand for. So women often play that role of bringing together other people's ideas and facilitating the meeting and making sure everyone knows when they should be speaking and helping other people to contribute. And that is a great and important role. But actually, if no one knows where you stand on particular issues, or if you have any opinion, then that actually is not very good for you, because why would someone include you? Why would someone bring you into future meetings if your only role is as facilitator? Women are often told to participate more in meetings. So this is important. Do you participate? Do you contribute? Do you let the meeting happen around you? Do you show that you're involved and interested and energized? Do you show what you're passionate about in meetings? Or, these are criticisms that women often receive, that they don't do that. And also women don't appear to be engaged in meetings as they could be. And there are lots of reasons why this happens. If it's a meeting that's quite male dominated, it's moving really quickly, women can find it quite difficult to actually get in. And so that's why sometimes they don't participate. Or perhaps they've had an idea and it's been appropriated by someone else in the past, and they think, well, why contribute if my ideas are not being credited to me? So there can be many reasons why this happens, but really we need to overcome those challenges. There's a big sort of movement around bropriation and mansplaining. I don't know if you've come across these two terms before. So bropriation is when a man appropriates your comments. So what can happen is that you say something, you propose a fantastic idea, and then suddenly a man types up with the same idea, and everyone says that's fantastic when they didn't acknowledge it when you made it. Or this mansplaining, when you say something, you think you've articulated it perfectly clearly, and then a man decides to explain what you said, almost as if you were speaking a different language to your colleagues, and suddenly it makes sense to them. But also this is quite deep-rooted, actually. It happens from the playground. According to the research, and there's a great book by a woman called Deborah Tannen called Talking 9 to 5, even in primary school, in the playground, boys start to tune out to the voices of girls. And you find that boys and girls stop playing together as much, girls start playing with girls, boys start playing with boys, because suddenly they start to tune out to our voices. And if that happens as early as primary school, think about it in the workplace. They've been tuned out to our voices quite a long time, and so listening and taking in what we're saying, is a challenge. And there are things we can do, which we're going to talk about. And there's also this idea that the social psychologist Erwin Goffman talks about, that there's nothing inherently male or female, that there are patterns of behavior among the sexes, that if you depart from, you pay a high price. So if a woman is, you know, more masculine or macho in her approach, whatever you would deem that to be, so she might be more assertive and more direct, qualities that are often associated with men, she might be punished for that. Just as a man who shows a lot of emotional intelligence might be punished for that also, he might be deemed weak or ineffectual. So when we move away from what is socially acceptable for either gender, then we can pay a price, and that can be difficult. So this idea of assertive communication, which might not be associated with women, might then not be taken so well. So we're treading a fine line in terms of trying to get it right in the workplace. And you might think about your own situations. You might think, well, have I come across as too direct? Have I been penalized for that? Or have I been really passive and accepting because that's what I think is expected of me? So on both fronts, you might be actually, you know, on the wrong side of the line that you want to be on. The idea is that, you know, we can't be too bold. If you think about the story of Goldilocks, you know, that's sort of those bowls of porridge, you know, too hot, too cold, just right. We don't want to be too bold and too assertive, moving into aggressive. We don't want to be too passive. We need to find that line where it's just right for us and our organizations and the people we work with. As I said, it really starts early. It starts in the playground with girls and boys girls vying for to have their voices heard. And actually, I have an example from my daughter in primary school. I remember one day us walking home together and me asking her about her day and how it went. And she explained that she'd done something really well. But immediately she put a hand over her mouth and said, oh, I'm not showing off, am I? So she immediately sort of constrained herself because actually that wasn't good behavior for a girl to have, to be kind of shouting about her achievements and assertively saying what she was great at. And luckily I was able to catch that and say, no, it's great. You should be celebrating what you're great at. There's absolutely no problem, and continue to do it. But she had already been socialized to believe that wasn't necessarily a good thing to do. So a question to ask yourself might be that as well. You know, what am I doing? Am I doing what a good girl does, what I was taught to do as a young girl? And how is that playing out for me in the workplace now? Do I need to break those rules that I've been taught and rewrite them for my future to do things a bit differently? So what happens in these meetings? Well, I've talked about appropriation. Didn't I just say that? You know, happens to us all. We say something, a man repeats it typically, and suddenly it's a wonderful point. It's also not what you say, but how you say it. I do think we need to think about our voice and the way we calmly articulate what we have to say. I know for myself, if I get very excited, my voice will get faster and my pitch will get higher. You know, oh, that was amazing, didn't that brilliant thing happen? Well, I also know that when I start talking in that way, often my colleagues will tune out. So actually, what am I doing in terms of my voice, in terms of my passion, in terms of the way I'm communicating, that ensures I'm heard? And some people will say, well, I find it really difficult to have assertive communication because I'm quite a quiet and shy person, or some people might say introverted. I reflect a lot and I only speak when I have something really important to say. Or by the time I've thought about what I really want to say, someone else has said it, and so I don't want to repeat what they've said. Well, there's another amazing book called Quiet by a woman called Susan Cain, and she talks about the power of silence and the power of being an introvert. I know that I've coached people and then sat in on meetings and found that actually at the end of the meeting, the whole group will turn to them, because they will have been reflecting, digesting, ruminating what's being said, and they'll come out with some amazing insights at the end of the meeting that everyone will be really interested in. So if you are the silent but strong type, think about how you can bring your thoughts into the meeting. You might not have as much airtime. You might not be the person who thinks who speaks to think. You might be the person who thinks then speaks. So you might not have as many minutes of speaking, but it doesn't mean that it can't be really powerful and strong when you do have an intervention. It's also not how you say it, but sometimes who you are. And it's important to think about the point you're going to make and if it's best to come from you. Just because you have an important point or something to say, you sometimes have to think about the power and politics in your organization. You have to think about your position and if it is best to come from you. Sometimes it's best to influence outside of the meeting and then let someone else communicate the point that you are going to make so that it lands first time. So being heard doesn't mean that it always has to come out of your mouth. As I've said, it can be hard for girls to influence boys, and one of the big tips is to lower your voice to where it's most comfortable. When I first started facilitating, I co-facilitated with a man, and I'd say to the group, okay, stop that activity now, we're going to resume the session, and I find that people wouldn't stop immediately. And his tip to me was just lower your voice ever so slightly, still so it's comfortable, and you'll realize that people will stop. And there is something about when you're in a meeting and you want to make an important point, just lowering your voice to the most comfortable point for you. So I'm not talking about talking in a deep voice like this, you know, I'm not talking, you know, expecting you to do something like that, but just lowering it ever so slightly. Because there is something about that being authoritative. Women and men listen better to a slightly deeper voice. Some meetings that are in unequal opportunities, you know, the meetings are unstructured and it's a bit of a free-for-all. And I think a lot of us may have experienced that, and it can be really difficult to get in. You could look at the agenda in advance and ask the person who's chairing the meeting to bring you in. You might say, point 3, I've got some really important things to say. Could you bring me in rather than me fighting to get into the conversation? But I'll also share with you some further strategies as we'll go through this webinar. And another thing you can do is actually, because alignments do shift and you can't always tell who's on whose side, you could perhaps actually ask someone to align with you. So you could, in advance of a meeting, say to someone, a colleague, you know, I'm going to make this point, will you back me up? I think if the two of us make it, actually it will definitely be heard. That's great in the short term. In the long term, what happens if that person's not there? Or what happens if that person is accredited with that great point you made, not you? So it's a short-term solution, but not necessarily great in the long term. So I wonder, how do you prepare to be heard in meetings? If you have lots of meetings, some you're probably just rushing into by the skin of your teeth, making it there and hoping to wing it. That's fine. But there are some meetings that are really important. They have important people in them, and they're important to you because you might have a really important point to make. So how do you prepare then? What do? Do you look at the agenda? Do you prepare some points that you want to make? Do you make sure you know where it is, how long it will be, who's attending, perhaps research the attendees a little bit? Those might be some of the things that you do. But I've also got some suggestions and some ideas of other things you could do. Do you prepare physically? So if it's a really important meeting, perhaps you might actually be a little bit nervous. Perhaps you might need to show yourself as confident. Something I always do is think of myself like a tree. You know, if you're sitting down right now, if you were a tree, you'd have your feet firmly on the ground because you'd have deep roots and they would firmly anchor you. You'd sit with your back upright and you'd be stretching yourself as tall as possible because that's what trees do. They're very upright and they stretch up and outward. So, you know, actually thinking about your posture. And the better your posture, if your chest is open and your back is straight, the better your voice and the projection of your voice will be as well, which is really good for you in a meeting if you're preparing to be heard. If you are nervous, go and shake yourself out. When I've been nervous about situations, I've spoken to large groups of people, I might go to the toilet in advance and just jump up and down for a couple of minutes and shake out all of that adrenaline so it doesn't affect your voice, so it doesn't affect how you're going to come across. And walk purposefully into the room. Don't sort of dip your head around the door and sort of peep in and tentatively walk in. Actually show from the moment that you walk in that you are confident and that you're supposed to be there. Dress with confidence, whatever that means for you. That might be wearing your favorite socks or your favorite earrings. It might be, being really suited and booted. Whatever makes you and gives you confidence, wear it. Some people will put a jacket on the back of their chair so that when they're going into an important meeting, they've always got a jacket they can put on that makes them feel comfortable. Some people will have a nice coloured scarf to brighten up their outfit and give them confidence. It's whatever that is for you. And claim your space. So often we are, if you may have commuted into work, for example, this morning. So often we make ourselves as small as possible, don't we? We're on a train, surrounded by people, and we're the ones taking up the smallest amount of space next to the person who's got their legs wide open, spreads all their papers out in front of them, puts their arms, on the table and takes up all the space. If you're going to take up verbal space in a meeting, you need to take up physical space too. So think about how you do that. Maybe you put your arms on the table, your elbows on the table and your arms out to show I'm taking up space here. Perhaps you put your papers out on the table to show you're taking up space. But make sure, as Sheryl Sandberg would say, that you have a seat at the table, that you're not perched on the edge, that you're showing that you're meant to be there. So take up physical as well as verbal space. And think big voice. Always talk to the person who's the furthest away in the room, whoever that might be. It's really easy to talk to the two people on either side of you, making sure that they hear you. But the furthest person in the room, if you're projecting your voice there, you can be sure that everyone else will hear you. And also prepare mentally. If you're rushing from one meeting to another, sometimes you haven't really got your thoughts in place for the next meeting. There's an idea that you can take a helicopter ride. So that's the idea that you actually think about yourself as above everything else and looking down on it. So you can look objectively and think about connections and sort of distance yourself a little bit from what's going on in order to order your thoughts and think logically about how you're going to interact. You might also want to quieten your mind. If you've got hundreds of to-do lists, lots of customer requirements, staff requirements on your mind, how do you quieten your mind? And some of you may be familiar with the apps Headspace or Calm. They're really good apps that you can use just for 5 minutes to quieten your mind in order to get yourself in the space you need to be for your meeting. Or what you might do is actually just write down everything that's on your mind on a blank sheet of paper, put it in your desk drawer, knowing that you're parking it to come back to it. Or you might go for a quick walk, just a really short 2-minute walk around the block, around your building, to kind of get yourself in a different zone. You should know what you want to say and also know what you know. The research often shows that women, even when you're the most expert in the room on a topic, won't speak up. You'll let someone else speak on it. So actually, if you're the expert in the room on a topic, you should know that you know it and speak up about it. And as always, stand by your values and your ethics, because you'll feel better actually as a result of it. So it's important to understand the conversational style at your work. If you're new to an organization, take some time to think, how do they communicate? Are they light-hearted? Do they use humor? Are they very formal? How do they communicate? And be careful about your own self-talk. If a lot's going on in your head during the meeting, then you're not fully present. If you're thinking, what if I make that comment, they'll think I'm stupid. What if I make a mistake? All of those sorts of things, then you're not present. So try and eliminate that. Try and actually really listen and be prepared to speak. And think about what the shift that you want to create in the meeting is. Why am I here? What's the outcome that I'm looking for? You know, what's the purpose? And passion wins. Be passionate, but be calm at the same time. So, you know, actually show what you're passionate about and speak up about what you're passionate about, because passion will bring others along with you. So I want to share with you a tool which I think is really helpful when we're thinking about creating the fact that people take your comments or will re-explain what you've said as if it hasn't made sense. I think this is a really good model that you can use. And it's from a book called The A to Z of Being Understood by Kay White. So what she says is that when we have an important point to make and we're finding it difficult maybe to have our points heard and attributed to us, we should make our point, explain it 3 times, and make our point again. So I'm going to share that with you in an example. So this is a personal example of when I've used it. So my point, I would like us to have technology-free Sundays. The reason that I think that's a good idea is, number one, I've been reading up about Wi-Fi and how it's actually not that helpful for us to be living in homes with the Wi-Fi constantly on. So actually, if we turned it off for a day, it might be really good for our health. The second, my other point is that actually I think it would be really good for us as a family to have a technology-free day. I think we'd talk to each other instead of having our heads down around our technology. And I think that would be really good for us as a family. And thirdly, I think it would just clear our heads ready for Monday so that we're ready to take on the week. So my point again, I would like us to have technology-free Sundays. So if you see, I made my point, gave my 3 points again, 3 points about it, my 3 explanations, and made my point again. No one in my family would ever be able to say that they attributed that point to them. No one would be able to say that I didn't make that point, but also it was really succinct. And in preparation for making my point, explaining it 3 times and making my point again, what I had to do was really think carefully about my argument and think carefully about what they might say against it. And also it's quite succinct, so people don't get bored by the time you finish it, when sometimes we might have 10 points to make around our argument and they might have forgotten our original argument in the beginning because of it. So thinking about it in that way, it can be a really helpful tool for you. So I'd encourage you just, you know, in your notebook that you take into meetings or important conversations, just write PEP in the back of it, or prepare your PEP in advance of it so that you can actually have that in preparation. Also think about where you sit. So if you're preparing to speak, you should be sitting in the energy center. And that's typically opposite the person who's chairing the meeting or next to the person who's chairing the meeting or the most powerful person in the room, because you want them to see you when you want to make a point. You don't want to be trying to get into the conversation forever. You want them to notice that you're trying to get in to bring you into the conversation. And you also want the person who's powerful in the room to know that you're a person who wants to communicate and actually wants to participate too. So this idea of sitting in the energy center is an important thing to do. And you don't have to do it for every single meeting, but when it's an important point meeting, when you want to get your point across, this is an important aspect of being heard. So it's really important for you to be aware that there can be challenges when you're going to communicate. I think it's important for you to monitor your communication style according to your context and your personality. One of the questions that was sent in advance was actually about culture. It was actually asking, you know, if you want to be assertive in a culture that doesn't have assertive communication, what do you do? And I think it's important for you to think, well, in this context, what does it mean to be assertive? It might not be the same thing if you're in a culture that's very assertive anyway. And you also have to think about your own personality. So your form of assertive communication might be more outside of the meetings. It might be that you want to communicate and show that you have a point to make so that someone can help you in the meeting bring out that point. Or what you might do is actually say in advance, oh, I apologize, I'm a brash English person, and so I'm a bit more assertive in my communication. Please don't take offense, but I really want to make this point. So you actually can make a bit of a joke about it, but still be assertive. So you need to think about the right way to do it for your situation. You don't need to be changed or fixed if you feel that you're not assertive already, but I think you do need to be carefully prepared and develop your confidence, because if you don't communicate, if you don't speak up, you won't be heard and you'll miss opportunities. And if you do find it difficult, if you're not so confident in this area, I encourage you to find opportunities to show up and speak. There are organisations like Toastmasters, for example, where you can practice your public speaking, but there might be initiatives inside your organisation, your sports and social club, or your women's network, or even one-to-one meetings where you just practice your style and your approach and doing things differently so that you could feel more comfortable doing it. And also there are places you can get help. Maybe you can buddy with a colleague, maybe you can get a coach like myself who's going to help you, maybe you can get a mentor, someone more experienced in your organisation to support you. So there are lots of places you can get help and support to really improve your communication approach and your assertiveness, and lots of books out there also. I want to share with you some really great research, and it's called Women Find Your Voice by Heath Flynn and Davis Holt. And they researched 2,000 women, and these were senior women in organisations. And even though they were really senior, they got to the top, they were in board meetings, often male-dominated, in rooms with mostly male-dominated, they still found it hard to read the room if they were the only woman at the table. And they still found it hard to get into the conversation when they were the only woman at the table, particularly if it was a fast-paced, assertive conversation. So some tips that came out of that were to master the pre-meeting. Actually, before the meeting, get there early. How often do you just arrive on time, slip into the meeting and get on with it? Well, there's a whole other meeting that's happened before the meeting starts. If you could get there early and find out people's opinions and what they're talking about and where they stand, and even start to share with them your thinking, you're more likely to be involved. Sorry, I hope it is a bit quieter now. I've been told that there was a little bit of background noise. I hope that it's not distracting you. Please let me know if you can still hear it.
Thanks, Jenny. That's great. Thank you.
Okay. Also, to keep on an even keel. So even if perhaps people are disagreeing with you or you're feeling a bit emotional, just try to keep on an even keel in the meeting. That's an important thing to do. Or if you feel that you're being a bit sidelined, find ways to still be calm. And also, lastly, prepare to speak. Be prepared, whether that's having written down what you want to say or thought about it carefully. Actually have prepared yourself physically, mentally, and with the words that you want to communicate. So they suggested that you use this something called muscular language. And so on the left here are typical ways we might communicate. We might say, how about we try this approach? Or I tend to agree with the point you've made, perhaps we could do this. Or I think maybe this approach might work for us. Or I agree, yeah, that's an effective way we can go forward. Or maybe we can try this approach. Or, well, what if we thought about this differently? So this is typical ways that we might communicate, and this, of course, will work if we're not in a very aggressive environment, if we're not in an environment where it's very difficult to be heard. If all your colleagues work with you effectively, you will be heard using this language. But when it's more challenging, here are some alternatives that you can try. So instead of how about, you might say, I strongly suggest. Instead of I tend to agree, that's absolutely right, and here's why. Instead of I think maybe, my strong advice is. And instead of I agree completely because. Instead of maybe we can, here is my plan, and instead of what if, we'd say I recommend. And I hope you can hear the difference. This is much more assertive language. It's, you really can muscle your way into the conversation using this language. And it's not language you'd use all the time, but if you've been sitting in a meeting for 10 minutes trying to get your point across, trying to get a word in, this is the language that you can use to muscle into the conversation. And it really is effective. And again, in the same way that I said, put PEP in the back of your notebook so you have it prepared there for the meeting, I would suggest you put this in the back of your notebook as well, these sentences on the right, so that you have them when you need them, so that you can definitely be heard. So some final tips. Lower your voice and project. Yeah? Lower your voice to a comfortable place. We don't have to be Margaret Thatcher, if you can remember. She definitely had elocution lessons and spoke in a quite a contrived way. It's not about not being yourself, but it's about ensuring that you're heard. If you are challenged, remember it's not personal. Try and stay calm, stick to the facts, and don't back down if you think you're right. They're challenging your points. They're not challenging you as a person. So try and just be calm about it. And also let it go after the meeting. Don't let it ruin your weekend. Humour can be a great icebreaker, but use it with care. Some people are great at using humour. Some people find it more challenging. If your type of humour works in your organisation, in your context, you can use that really effectively to be heard. And, sometimes it can be really difficult to establish yourself as authority and be heard and be credible. And I think about this a little bit like dating or like having a partner. So you might have a partner for a number of years or months, and they might be taking you for granted. Suddenly someone else outside of your relationship takes a bit of interest in you, and suddenly they're really interested again. Well, organizations are a bit like that. If you're working really effectively, you're doing a really good job, they can kind of put you in a box and think this is where this person needs to be and they should stay there. And if you can get credibility outside of your organization, if other people start looking at you, then they might open opportunities for you. You might be more likely to be heard. So the example here is a woman called Anna Ride. She got online credibility, and that spilled into the real world. She started a blog, and that blog was really well thought of, and it meant that she became an industry expert. So you could do things like go for awards, or you could possibly write articles or speak at conferences, different things that you could do that could increase your credibility. That means your organization listens to you more. So you think about that. If you've tried a lot to be heard inside, and it's not about having airtime, but that you don't think that you're being seen as credible, think about getting some external support, some external validation, which will help you. And my final tips, make stew but serve only meat. Get to the real substance of what you're trying to say. If you talk for too long, people stop listening. Something like PEP can really help you organize what you want to say, organize your thoughts, so you don't lose people and they forget what your point was. And also try not to say but. So you can say, oh yeah, that's a really great point, and I think we could do this. But if you say, yes, we can, that's a great point, but people only listen to what you've said after the but, and they don't hear the fact that you were validating their point too. So try and use and rather than but, so that you are heard. Because if you think you're just disagreeing with them, they become defensive and stop listening to you. So I'd love you, we've come to the end of today's webinar, I'd love you, just before my final point, to just type in what you think you are, what you'll do as a result of this webinar today. What are you taking away? What one thing are you going to try differently in order to be heard in your organization, in your client meetings, in any way? So if you type them in, maybe Maggie will be kind enough to share them with you. Thank you. And while you're doing that, if you'd like to get in touch for a complimentary 30-minute coaching consultation on any challenges that you're experiencing in your career, I'd be really happy to support you. I'm a speaker, I provide leadership development, retreats and coaching. And so I take quite a holistic approach to helping you with your work and business life. So thank you so much for your time. I'm happy to answer any questions now. I did have one question as well that was sent in advance while you're still typing, which was, how do you politely interrupt someone who's senior and is taking up lots of airtime? So I think things that you can say if you're in a position to do so is, in service of the agenda, I'd like every part of the agenda to get the allocated amount of time. Could we park that for now and come back to that later on if we have enough time? Or you might say, that's a really great point, maybe that deserves a meeting on its own, or a group of people to really work on that. Can we take that outside the meeting to another meeting? Or if it continues to happen, you might speak to the chair of the meeting as well and say to them, is there a way to manage this differently, to allocate a certain amount of time to different points, or to say something like, we'd love to hear from certain people on certain points only. So those are some suggestions. I hope that's answered that question. Okay.
Brilliant. Thank you so much, Jenny. That's been really interesting and excellent. A few people have replied on the chat function, just saying around their action, it would certainly be around the muscular language, and also the three repeating it 3 times. I've asked if anybody's got any questions here, but I don't think anything come through yet. Somebody else is saying about the muscular language being a great tip, and I have to admit, for me, I'd obviously seen the slides before Jenny had presented them, and that was one of the slides that stood out for me as well, just about how small changes in your language can actually have a really big impact. One of my favourite ones also is the use of the word just. And I have really tried to remove the word just, not in terms of a time, I've just left you a message, but I'm just calling you because, and I really try to always remove the word just.
Yeah.
I think that's quite a word that can detract from the rest of the phrase. Well, maybe a little bit like when you were saying about the word but too.
Absolutely, yes. And sorry, and saying sorry, I'm sorry. And yesterday I was delivering some training on imposter syndrome actually for a group, and a woman was talking about trying to get into the conversation, and she was saying that what she often says is, oh, this is probably someone suggested to her to say, this is probably a silly question, and I said, that's actually not that great language to use, because if you say that, they anticipate it to be a silly question, and they can easily fob you off and say that was a silly question, rather than, actually just saying, I have a question, and if it is a silly question, it is, but, yeah, definitely the language makes a difference, and the way we frame what we say tells people how to respond to us.
Indeed, yes, I definitely agree about it. It's a silly question. Don't say that. It's your question. You want to ask it. So I don't know if anybody does have any more questions for Jenny. Please feel free to use the chat functionality to ask any questions there. Somebody else is saying that they agree about the use of the word just in language. I actually read something about this a couple of years ago in an article, and about how it is the word that maybe ladies are more like to use. And actually, Jenny, I just remembered somebody had asked a question as you were doing your slides earlier in the presentation. I'm just going to scroll back up to what it was. It was to do with it was one of the earlier slides about women in meetings women acting like facilitators. And what the lady just asked, is there any empirical evidence for that?
Yeah, this is from research, actually. It is from research. Let's see if I can find where the research is from, because I should be able to. I think it might be this research from anthropologist Marjorie Hannis-Goldwyn. So she has got from her research. So if you Google Marjorie Hannis-Goldwyn, maybe I should write that in the chat tool. I'll send it to you, Maggie, and then you can.
I can share it afterwards. And in fact, you mentioned a couple of books as well. I mean, if there's any resources that you think it would be useful for me to share with the participants today, I can do that as well. And certainly we'll reiterate the coaching consultation as well. And I've actually known Jenny for quite a long time, and I've heard her speak about a number of different topics. So certainly can comment on some of that, but hopefully that's answered the question about the women acting like facilitators. I'm just going to scroll back down to the bottom of the questions and see if there's been any more. No, I don't have any more questions, and I know that you've answered the questions that have got asked in advance. This has been really helpful. I mean, we're in and out. I mean, as business owners and business people, we're in and out of meetings all the time, and I mean, I know for me, I do a lot of small groups, maybe just 2 or 3 people, but actually then when you're in a much bigger environment, the challenges are much more as well, especially if you don't know the environment. If you're maybe pitching or selling, it might be slightly different to working with colleagues, but this has all been really, really helpful. So I'm just going to ask one more if there's any more final questions for Jenny, and if not, then we'll... I've got one more question coming in. If not, we'll close. But I've got one more question that's come in about one of your slides mentioned about the energy sensor, I think. And where's the worst place to sit?
Where's the worst place to sit? I guess at the back in a corner. Somewhere that you should be sitting where people can see you and you can see them. So if you're obstructed from being seen by some people, that's not a good place to sit. The person who's chairing the meeting, try and sit opposite them or next to them. That's the best place to sit, because then you've got the ear of the person who's running the meeting. You've got an opportunity to be noticed, and that would be my recommendation. You don't have to do this all the time. Years ago, I worked in an organisation where a colleague would always sit next to our boss. Whenever there was a team meeting, always sat next to him and would be, grinning at everything he said, and it was really awful. It was sort of, ingratiating himself. So it's not something that you have to do all the time, but just think, I've got an important point to make in this meeting. I want to make sure I'm heard. You don't want to be at the back of the room, sort of trying to be seen before you make your point. You want it, you want to be able to sit there confidently so that everyone can see you, so that your voice can travel, so you've got the eye contact of people, the important people in the room. So don't, if you're late and you end up perching on the corner of the table, that's the kind of worst place to sit, really. Or, because then you're just not, you're not kind of showing you mean business. So I think it's about just taking up some space and owning it.
Great. Right, hold on. Thank you, Jenny, and I've got another question here. Somebody's saying, I'd love to ask Jenny about the scenario of being perceived as a strong personality, and then how to balance that in a manner that doesn't intimidate or be seen as confrontational to men, but also doesn't demean you by apologising for yourself.
Right.
Okay.
Yeah, I
sort of fighting the urge to apologise for the comment, but it's a great comment, Laura. So thanks for asking it. And I don't think you will be alone in the businesswomen that I know who kind of have these. So around strong personalities and balancing it without being seen as confrontational. Yeah,
I mean, I think we should be unapologetically ourselves, and there's a part of what we're doing is changing things, isn't it? Really, this continuum of what male and female behaviour looks like does need to change, because we're in organisations and we're in senior roles, and we do need to be assertive, and assertive women, it needs to be accepted. I guess for me, it's always about intention, and that if you go into something with a very positive intention and people see that, they're often quite forgiving of the way in which you deliver it, because none of us are perfect, none of us will always communicate perfectly. So you might want to share your intention more before you speak. So just say, I want to say, I don't think we're doing a good job here. So I might say, before I say, if I'm being very direct, I don't think we're doing a very good job, my intention is for us to be the best we can be. Yeah, so I might share my intention before I then communicate. the sort of very direct, in the very direct way I do. So people know where I'm coming from. So I think sometimes with direct, assertive communication, people are not sure about what's underlying it. And so you just might need to do a little bit of the intention work before you communicate. So you don't change it, you don't change the way you communicate, but you share where it's coming from. And then people are usually much more understanding and appreciative of it.
Brilliant. Thank you. Laura says thank you very much. That's a really great response. Thank you so much.
Good.
Great. Right, and I don't think there's any more questions, but if there are, you can obviously follow up with Jenny directly. Her contact details are on the final slide, and I'll make sure that they're with the follow-up email that we'll send out as well. And please feel free to get in touch with Jenny to find out more. So Jenny, thank you so much for presenting. This was really, as I said, this was really super interesting, and I think there are so many ideas and suggestions in here that people could, can easily start to adopt in their participation in different meetings, and I'm sure in many different parts of business as well. So I just want to say a very big thank you from us on behalf of WEConnect International for presenting for us today. As I said to everybody, we will share the slides and we will share the recording so you can listen back, and Jenny certainly will make sure that the recording is shared with the wider WEConnect International network so that everybody who wasn't able to dial in live today can also listen back. But thank you again, and thank you to all of you for dialing in and for participating. And I'll look forward to being in touch with you all for our next webinar, which I think will be after the summer break. So thanks very much, everybody. And Jenny, thank you again.
Thanks for the opportunity. Take care.
Brilliant. Thanks, everybody.